Greetings! Welcome to the Primary Arcane Guide. Today I'm gonna go through all the primary arcanes, explain what they do, where you get them, and most importantly, explain what their strengths and weaknesses are. I'm not just gonna tell you what's the best. And hopefully by the end of this video you will understand when to use certain arcanes, because this is a silly example that I like to use, but it's very much true. You wouldn't use running shoes while swimming just because someone told you they're good. Because while yes, running shoes are very much good, top-notch even, the thing they're good at is not helping you swim. This is very much a gripe of mine because nowadays everything on the internet is the best, but no one tells you why. Also, there are timestamps in the video description that you can use to navigate this video to certain arcanes if you don't want to watch the whole thing. Up first we have the all-reliable Primary Merciless. This drops from Acolytes in Steel Path, so it's very easy to get and will most likely be one of your first maxed arcanes. It stacks up to 12 times and it triggers on kill. It provides up to 30% damage per stack, so a grand total of 360% bonus damage, with a nice little bonus of 30% faster reload speed if you get it to rank 5, which is active at all times. This is very much the bread and butter arcane. It works on everything, doesn't have any conditions, you just need to shoot things and you get damage. It's often used instead of mods like Serration, Heavy Caliber or Point Blank because they are the same multiplier, so you don't necessarily want to stack them on top of one another unless you have no other option, and it's tremendous for weapons with bad reload speed. However, the main upside of Merciless, that being its versatility, is also one of its downsides. Yes, it works on everything, but it's rarely the best, because all it provides is generic damage. Additionally, its somewhat high stack count of 12 can be difficult to ramp up with certain weapons and builds, because the stacks also have a very short duration of only 4 seconds. Basically, sometimes you cannot get kills to stack your damage because you have no damage to begin with. This is particularly prevalent on builds where you replace Serration or Point Blank with Merciless. So, Primary Merciless, the bread and butter. Works on everything, but it's rarely the best. I mostly use it for weapons with very bad reload speeds or weapons that don't work well with the other arcanes. Up next we have Primary Deadhead. This one also drops from Acolytes, so it's very easy to get and will most likely be one of the first arcanes you will max out. It triggers on a headshot kill and it stacks up to 3 times, with each stack providing up to 120% bonus damage for a grand total of 360%. Additionally, at rank 5 you will get a passive bonus of 30% bonus headshot multiplier as well as minus 50% to the weapon's recoil. This is actually a very strong arcane that's used on a lot of weapons as long as those weapons can get consistent headshot kills. This is the biggest downside of Primary Deadhead. It has to be a direct headshot kill. Hitting an enemy in the head, proccing a damage over time effect, and the enemy dying from said damage over time effect does not count. It's also a precision headshot kill, so no AoE either, has to be a direct hit. So Deadhead, unlike Merciless, which can be used on pretty much all weapons, can only effectively be used on certain weapons. Luckily though, the stack duration on Deadhead is 24 seconds, so you don't need to get headshots that often, you just need to get it every now and then. It is, just like Merciless, often used in place of mods like Serration or Point Blank, because it's the same multiplier, so you don't necessarily want to stack them on top of one another unless you have no other option, but it's generally better than Merciless on most weapons, because it's easier to stack and sustain, you only need to get 3 kills instead of 12, and the stacks last 6 times as long, and you get the extra headshot multiplier. I know 30% doesn't sound like much, but that is a difficult stat to get, so you will most likely not have it anywhere else. Also, you should not underestimate the minus 50% weapon recoil. This is a really nice stat to have on weapons where you want to aim down sights. But it's not all good, there are some downsides. Unsurprisingly, you need to hit headshots with Primary Deadhead to take full advantage of it. If you're running around, spraying and praying, mostly hitting body shots, it's not gonna do much. And you might be better off getting the extra reload speed from Merciless. And the same thing kind of goes for AoE weapons. Some of them can hit headshots very reliably, some of them can't. One cool thing about Primary Deadhead is that it provides headshot multiplier for weapons that don't normally have it. Some examples would be the Arca Plasmor as well as the Tenet version, the Alternox, Primary Catchamoon, Coda Bass Assist, the Fulmin, and so on. If you put Deadhead on these, they will actually do 30% more damage on a headshot. It's also worth mentioning that electricity and gas procs do take headshot multiplier into account when calculating damage if they were created upon landing a headshot. So it's pretty damn good for headshot focused gas and electricity builds. So Primary Deadhead. Generally better than Primary Merciless, it will outperform it on most weapons, but it requires a lot more thought. You need to look at the weapon you're using and ask yourself, does this headshot enough to not only sustain it, but to also take advantage of the headshot multiplier? Most weapons can very much do that, but there are some that just can't. It also might not be your thing. If you don't want to go for headshots, then don't. It's a video game. Do your thing. Have fun. Next on the menu, we have the final Primary Acolyte Arcane. Primary Dexterity. This, as mentioned already, also drops some Acolyte, so it's most likely one of the first arcanes you will max out. This one triggers on a melee kill, stacks up to 6 times, and it provides up to 60% damage per stack for a total of 360%. Additionally, it provides 7.5 seconds of extra combo duration for melee weapons at rank 5. And just like Merciless and Deadhead, the damage multiplier it provides is just generic damage, so most of the time it's used in place of mods like Serration, Heavy Caliber, or Point Blank. Now, a lot of people write Primary Dexterity off as a bit of a meme arcane, but that's not true. There are some potential uses here. Here are some examples where Primary Dexterity actually works rather well. Number 1, you use a primary weapon that reloads while holstered, and you use your melee weapon while the weapon is reloading. Number 2, you have a utility weapon in your primary slot, like the Mitre for popping nullifier bubbles, that doesn't necessarily benefit from having more damage, so you can run Primary Dexterity to get combo sustain. This allows you to not run combo sustain on your weapon or not run the Naramon Focus School. And number 3, you're using an AoE melee weapon and a single target primary. So you're clearing enemies with your melee weapon, and when a stronger, beefier target shows up, you can switch to your primary and kill them without having to stack your arcane first. These are some examples where you might want to use Primary Dexterity. Now, the downside of Primary Dexterity is quite obvious. It's just straight up worse than the other arcanes unless you're in one of those very niche scenarios. It also forces you to use a melee weapon whether you want to or not. So Primary Dexterity, extremely niche, but can sometimes be useful. It's very, very rarely going to be the best though. Primary Crux is a relatively new arcane that can be obtained in various different places in Holvania. It can be bought from Eleanor, you can get it as a reward from the 1999 calendar, from Techrot saves in Holvania missions, as well as Skaldra caches in Holvania Exterminate missions. It can drop from the H09 Ephraven tank, it may be rewarded from Holvania face-off missions, and finally it can be dropped by the Skaldra Screamer in stage defense. It triggers on a weak point hit, stacks up to 10 times, and provides up to 30% status chance and 6% ammo efficiency per stack, resulting in a grand total of 300% status chance and 60% ammo efficiency when fully stacked. This is an incredibly strong arcane on a vast amount of weapons. The status chance can easily cover the status needs of even hybrid weapons, allowing you to focus more on either raw elemental damage, crit, or both, and the ammo efficiency effectively increases your magazine size by 60%. It's also incredibly easy to stack, you only need to get a weak point hit, not a kill, and it counts every bullet, even those created by multi-shot. So on shotguns, for example, you can very easily get the full 10 stacks with a single shot, assuming you have enough multi-shot. I absolutely love this arcane and I use it a lot, but it doesn't work on everything. It's generally better on fast-firing weapons with larger magazines, and the weapon needs to have a set amount of status chance for the arcane to have a reasonably strong effect on it. I aim for at least 10 to 15% status chance on fast-firing fully automatic or burst weapons, and roughly around at least 25% for weapons that fire slower. There are of course some outliers, there always will be, but these kinds of weapons generally suit it the best. This is also one of the main downsides of Crux. It only really works on weapons that have enough status. If your weapon has 5% status chance, increasing it by 300% is not gonna do much, because this isn't a flat increase in status, it's a percentage increase to the weapon's baseline. Also, the ammo efficiency will barely do anything on weapons with small magazines. A 4-round magazine will get 2 extra shots, whereas a 100-round mag will get 60. With that said though, it can actually be used rather effectively to increase the ammo efficiency of explosive weapons, which generally have a very tiny ammo reserve. So, Primary Crux, an amazing and strong arcane. It works really well on fast-firing weapons with large magazines, it plays really well with Condition Overload from Galvanized status mods because it allows you to focus on raw elemental damage rather than using dual stat mods, and it can very much be used to improve the ammo efficiency of explosive weapons. And finally, it's very easy to stack, so the weapons you put it on will have very little, if any, ramp up at all. Just bear in mind that you ideally want to take advantage of both the status chance and the ammo efficiency. Only taking advantage of one is not ideal. This is often a problem with Incarnon weapons because Incarnon charge is not affected by ammo efficiency, so when you're in Incarnon mode, half the arcane does nothing. Primary Blight is a Duviri arcane that can be acquired from Steel Path Circuit, or it may be bought from Acrites with Pathos Clamps. It triggers on a Toxin status effect and it stacks up to 40 times, providing up to 3.6% increased critical damage and 1.8% increased multi-shot, totaling up to 144% crit damage and 72% multi-shot when fully stacked. Now, the Toxin procs have to come from the primary weapon equipped with this arcane, so you can't have a pet or something else proc it for you. The stacks also last a decent amount of time, 12 seconds to be exact, though you lose all of them if the duration runs out. This is an interesting arcane that can provide a lot of value on crit weapons that can reliably proc Toxin. The main problem is that Toxin mixes into Corrosive and Gas, two very good elemental combos. So unless you have a weapon that can force proc Toxin on its own without any modding intervention, you're not just asking yourself, is this arcane better than the other ones? You are also asking yourself, is running Toxin better than running Corrosive or Gas? And most of the time, the answer to that is no. So is Primary Blight ever used? Well, yes, absolutely. It just requires a little bit of setup. Sarin and Lavos can both bypass elemental combinations on weapons and add Toxin damage to weapons with either Gas or Corrosive, removing the need to choose between Toxin, Corrosive or Gas. And then there are weapons that can force proc Toxin, like the Seto with its glyph. And let's also not forget about Corpus-focused builds. Toxin damage bypasses shields, which is their primary form of defense. So if you want to go bully some shield boys, Toxin isn't the worst element to run. This is particularly good on crit-based explosive weapons where you run Blast with Toxin on top. The extra crit damage and multi-shot can be very nice there. So, Primary Blight, an actually decent arcane that's unfortunately very niche. It's mostly used by Sarin and Lavos players, but every now and then you can use it on its own as well. It just requires a bit of thought. Primary Frostbite comes from Tier 2 Conjunction Survival on Rotation C, or it can alternatively be purchased from Arcamidi and Yonta for 15 Luathrax Plasm a pop. It triggers on a cold status effect, stacks up to 40 times with the stacks lasting 12 seconds, and if the duration runs out, you will lose all of them at once. It provides up to 3% critical damage as well as 2.25% multi-shot per stack for a grand total of 120% critical damage and 90% multi-shot when fully stacked. Unlike Blight, however, it doesn't require the cold proc to come from the weapon itself. You can proc it via your frame, or even your Sentinel can proc it. This, in combination with the fact that Cold is a far more desirable damage type due to its ability to slow enemies down and increase their crit damage taken, makes Primary Frostbite just a better version of Primary Blight, especially for Frost and Lavos players where it's essentially free. This, unlike Blight, can effectively be used on a wide variety of weapons, not just weapons like the Lens or Klaxion which have forced Cold procs. Because Corrosive and Cold is just a nice combination. You use Corrosive to strip away the enemy armor, and then Cold to shred their health, which also slows the enemies down, making them easier to headshot, increasing their crit damage taken, and stacking Frostbite, which adds even more crit damage and multi-shot. The way you determine whether or not to run Frostbite is pretty straightforward. You look at the weapon and go, okay, am I proccing Cold? If yes, does the weapon crit? If yes, does it benefit from multi-shot? If all three of those are a yes, you can run Frostbite. It's generally better on crit heavy weapons and it's gnarly on crit shotguns. It is not worth it on status weapons. If the weapon doesn't crit often and hard, Primary Frostbite is not the way to go. I usually go down a list when choosing an arcane for a weapon. First I look at the build and I ask myself, can I fit this in with Serration or point blank? If not, and I can't substitute the base damage with a Galvanized status mod, I choose Merciless or Deadhead. Then I look at the ammo efficiency and status and see if maybe I would want to run Crux. If that's also a no, I move on to the 3 Frostbite questions. That's pretty much it. So Primary Frostbite, far more usable than Primary Blight, even though they're very similar, easy to stack, and it works really well on crit heavy weapons, especially shotguns. Primary Plated Round is a weird arcane that can be obtained from Mirror Defense Rotation B or bought from OTAC for 60 Belric and Rania crystals a pop. It provides up to 10 seconds of a generic damage buff that's additive to mods like Serration or Point Blank, that scales off of each round loaded based on maximum magazine size. It matches the damage bonus of Serration, Heavy Caliber, and Prime Point Blank on a 25-round magazine, and the damage bonus from Deadhead, Dexterity, and Merciless on a 116-round magazine. There are two main issues with primary plated rounds. First is the magazine size. It only works on weapons that have a massive magazine by default. It's not worth modding for because any increase in damage you get from a larger magazine will be offset by the fact that you use the mod slot to get it. The second issue is the duration of the Arcane. Big magazines take a long time to fire out, and 10 seconds, more often than not, is not enough. So the weapon either has to have a massive magazine and high fire rate, or you have to mod for fire rate. It also doesn't work on battery style magazines, so if you have a self-recharging magazine, doesn't work. One cool thing about primary plated rounds is that it's entirely within your control. You choose when to reload and get the buff. But to be entirely honest with you, I've yet to find a weapon where I was happier with primary plated rounds instead of another Arcane. What I would recommend you do with primary plated rounds, if you find a weapon that you think might suit it, is take it into an actual mission. Don't test it in the simulacrum alone. Take it into an actual mission and test it there, because in the simulacrum, primary plated rounds can actually perform pretty well since the enemies are very clumped up and you don't have to move around. So, primary plated rounds, an extremely niche Arcane that only works on weapons with massive magazines and very high fire rate. Primary Exhilarate is a utility Arcane that can be obtained from Steel Path Circuit. It may be bought from Arcanes for 10 Pathos Clumps a pop, and it may drop from Undercroft Portals in Duviri. It triggers on an impact status effect, stacks up to 3 times, and provides up to 1.2 energy regen per second. Now, as mentioned already, this is a utility Arcane because it doesn't provide any power to the weapon at all. It also has to be an impact proc from the weapon itself, and it's always been pretty iffy about forced procs. Sometimes it just doesn't work with them. It synergizes decently well with internal bleeding builds because they duplicate impact procs into slash procs, but I've never actually used Primary Exhilarate myself in a serious build because nowadays generating energy is very trivial. Also, energy regeneration is not the best as it is stopped when channeling ability. So if, for example, you proc a bunch of Exhilarate and then jump into Razor Wing on Titania, you don't actually generate any energy, it just straight up stops working. So Primary Exhilarate, extremely niche and only really useful if you're very, very desperate for some energy regeneration. Primary Obstruct is yet another utility Arcane that's available from Steel Path Circuit, may be bought from Arcanes for 10 Pathos Clumps a pop, may be rewarded upon finishing Undercroft Portals in Duviri in Steel Path, but it can also drop from Captain Vor in the mission Tolstoy on Mercury on Steel Path. This triggers on a magnetic status effect and it will jam all the weapons of enemies that are within 15 meters of you with a cooldown that scales down based on the rank. It starts at 60 seconds and goes down to 10. This will jam the enemy guns for about 4-ish seconds. It varies from enemy to enemy based on the animation they have, and it can actually be extended with cold procs or gloom, to a point where with enough investment you can actually stun lock enemies. This is pretty useful if your setup needs crowd control. It's very rarely used as a part of an actual weapon build because, once again, it's a utility Arcane, it doesn't provide any benefit to the weapon itself. But I can absolutely see it on something like a Mitre with neutralizing justice that's used for popping nullifier bubbles. This is one instance where the Arcane triggering only from magnetic procs originating from the weapon equipped with it is actually a boon, because while yes, you have to mod the weapon for magnetic, you also won't trigger it by accident by simply proccing magnetic with something else. So all in all, another niche utility Arcane that doesn't actually help the weapon but can provide a lot of crowd control for your setup. Fractalized Reset is sort of a hybrid Arcane that can be purchased from Cavallero for 5,000 standing at pop, but it can also drop from Thrax Centurions, Thrax Legacies, Void Angels, and Ravenous Void Angels. It triggers on a Warframe ability cast and it provides up to 240% reload speed, which is additive with other reload speed mods, for 5 seconds. You don't see this Arcane used an awful lot because it doesn't provide any damage, it just provides reload speed, but there are some weapons where it's actually quite nice. One such example would be the Exurgis, which has a 1-round magazine with a 1.6 second reload. Basically, if a weapon is annoying as hell to reload and you can't fix it with mods or abilities, but is otherwise fine, you use Fractalized Reset. The cool thing about Fractalized Reset is that it doesn't care about which ability was cast, so you can just use a cheap ability to get a ton of reload speed for 5 seconds. That's pretty much it though, it just fixes weapons with really annoying reloads. The main issue with this Arcane in my opinion is that the buff is too damn short, because if you do want to use it on something like the Exhilarate, a weapon that basically needs this buff upkept at all times, you need to pair it up with a frame that would naturally cast a lot of abilities. Because if that's not the case and you have to ham-fist the ability casts into your gameplay for this to work, you might as well just tank the reload. It is much more well suited for weapons that have terrible reloads but don't have to reload that often. Next on the menu we have a bow-specific arcane called Longbow Sharpshot. This can be obtained from Steel Path Circuit, it can be bought from Arcanes for 20 pathos clamps a pop, and it may also be rewarded upon finishing Undergrowth portals in Duviri on Steel Path. This triggers on a headshot and provides up to 300% bonus damage on your next shot. Now that might not sound that great, until you realize that this is not generic damage, so it's multiplicative with serration. This for bows and users that can consistently headshot with those bows is generally considered to be the strongest arcane you can run on them. But it requires some skill, because it only works on the next shot, so you ideally want to chain headshots over and over and over again. This can be difficult with enemies like the Grenier that have giant shoulder pads, Infested which have heads in places heads absolutely should not be, or the Murmur, which are just limbs and rocks. So I'd consider it to be the baseline arcane for most precision bows. Put it on, try it out, if you cannot consistently headshot, run something else. I only use it very rarely because I'm not that good of a shot, but maybe you are. So definitely give it a shot. For me it very much depends on the bow. I swear by it on the Nataruk because the Nataruk has a large projectile, which makes it very easy to consistently hit headshots. But I won't use it on something like the Daiku. So definitely try it out, see if you can actually take advantage of it, and if yes, enjoy your big damage. And the final arcane for today is shotgun specific and it's called Shotgun Vendetta. This can be obtained from Steel Path Circuit, it may be sold by Arcanes for 10 pathos clamps a pop, and you might get it by finishing an Undergrowth portal in Duviri on Steel Path. This triggers on any shotgun kill if you're within 5 meters of the enemy or closer, and it provides up to 180% bonus multi-shot as well as up to 75% bonus reload speed for 15 seconds. This is a fantastic arcane for shotguns that have high spread and long reload. Because if you fire the enemy from far away, you'll miss most of your pellets, so the 5-meter thing isn't a problem, and it fixes your reload speed whilst also giving you a bunch of damage through multi-shot. The best thing to do with this arcane, if you think you might want to run it on a shotgun, is to put it on, go into a mission, play the mission as you would normally, and occasionally glance at the buff bar to see whether you have the buff or not. Because it's very, very difficult to force yourself to stand closer to the enemies than you naturally want to. One example of a weapon that works decently well with Shotgun Vendetta would be the Tigris Prime, a weapon which you essentially want to shove up the enemy's nose, one bang for each nostril, reload, move on to the next enemy. Nowadays, I mostly only use Shotgun Vendetta if the reload speed of a shotgun is beyond reasonable. If it's kind of bad, I will go Merciless for the 30% reload speed instead, and if it's not a problem at all, I will either go Crux for the status chance and ammo efficiency, or Frostbite for the crit damage and multi-shot. So, Shotgun Vendetta, a relatively niche arcane for shotguns that can provide a decent amount of damage through multi-shot whilst fixing your reload speed at the same time, but it's an arcane you absolutely need to try to see if it actually works with your playstyle. Because, and I will repeat myself here, it is very difficult to force yourself to stand closer to the enemies than you naturally want to. Another weapon that works really well with Vendetta, by the way, is the Exhilarate, because multi-shot and reload speed is precisely what you want. And that is it for the video. Blimey, this was a long one and I would appreciate it if you could leave any feedback in the comment section down below. I thank you very much for watching, as always guys, and I would like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much guys, I really appreciate your support, it means a lot to me. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.